Okay, hopefully everybody can hear me and you can see my screen. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Atara Margulies. I'm an urban designer and an architect and the project manager for this plan. Tonight, it will be a bit of an informal chat. We'll all introduce ourselves. The planning team will, so you know who's here. And then I'll give a brief intro presentation, after which we'll move into the question and answer. During Q&A, we're going to first address the questions people submitted in advance during the registration process, and then we'll open the floor for more questions. Just to be clear, we are not presenting an overview of the recommendations at this conversation. This is really a chance for people who have either watched our presentation a few weeks ago or looked at the plan online or sort of been following along to ask specific questions about the recommendations and what is actually in the draft plan. And if you haven't had a chance yet to watch our Silver Spring Tomorrow presentation, which was on October 25th. We have a video up, and we can put the link in the chat at some point during this conversation so that everybody, if you haven't watched that before. So I'm going to pause for a minute and let my team introduce themselves, and then we'll talk a bit about the team's platform and get going.
Thanks, Satara. I'm Elza Heisel-McCoy. I'm the chief of the Down County Planning Team.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lisa Gavoni, and I'm the housing planner for the planning department.
Good evening. I'm John Lieberts. I'm the historic preservation planner.
Good evening. I'm Tina Schneider, the environmental planner for the project.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren Sam, and I work on engagement for this project.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ifton Thompson, and I'm the transportation planner on this plan.
Good evening. I'm Hei Su. I'm the schools planner.
Good evening. I'm John Marcolene. I'm a urban designer and landscape architect on the team.
Good evening. I'm Christina Sasaki. I'm urban design and park planner for the project.
Okay, I think that's everybody. Great. And so let's talk for 1 minute about how to use Teams. Did we miss anyone? Since I can't see, guys, let me know. I don't think so, right? Great. So let's talk for how to use Teams. So people have been on this platform with us before, but just to remind you, we are recording this meeting, which is just for our own record. We're not, going to be posting it. And please, there's a few rules when you're speaking. One is just keep yourself muted using the mute button. I think everyone's familiar with this by now, or if you're on the phone by using *6, as we said in the beginning of the meeting. When you're not speaking, when you are contributing, there's two ways to contribute when we get to the question and answer portion. One is you can open up the meeting chat and type a question in, and you're actually welcome to do that at any point, and we'll be keeping track of those questions and get to them after the pre-submitted ones. Or when we're in that part of the conversation, you can sort of hover over this little smiley face with a hand, and a little menu pops up, and you can raise your hand, and that way we'll call on you. When you speak, obviously you'll unmute yourself, and it'd be great if people turn their camera on if you're comfortable. Just when you're asking a question, so we can see you when we listen and when we answer. So now we're going to go through a brief plan introduction just to put us all on the same page, although hopefully everybody here has been following along. And the plan boundary, which I think everybody is familiar with, is this plan boundary here. It includes the former central business district. We just don't use that term anymore. It's kind of an outdated term, and it's not in the zoning code any longer. And then there's a few blocks to the north and east that were included in this project boundary, which are located within a 10-minute walk or so of a downtown high-capacity rail station, which is either the rail station at the transit center or the rail station that is underway at the Purple Line library station. The timeline for this plan, we are, moving that orange arrow down the timeline. We are actually right in between the working draft and the public hearing. The working draft obviously was already accepted and set as the public hearing draft. The public hearing is on December 2nd. So we are right in between, having a conversation about that public hearing draft. After that, we're going to head into work sessions, and I'll go through a detailed schedule at the end of this brief presentation. After the work sessions, the draft that's produced then is called the planning board draft because it includes the planning board input. Goes to the county council. They're going to set a public hearing with the same 30-day notice. Another opportunity, of course, for the public to weigh in. submit testimony. We're going to go through the same process with the council, work sessions with the committee and with the full council, and get the council comments and ultimately the council approval of the plan. Once the plan is approved, there's a separate technical process called sectional map amendment, which actually does, enacts the zoning change itself that is recommended in the plan. As I think many of you are aware, since the very early days of the plan, we've been engaging stakeholders, mostly online, because this whole plan has taken place during COVID. But we've tried as hard as we can to reach as many people as possible in this format. We had lots of listening sessions, and then we transitioned into a visioning phase that started pretty much in the spring of 2021, and really tried to bring people in and have more of a collaborative discussion about what people wanted to see in Silver Spring and how we could get there. And of course, at the end of all of that, we sort of collated as many of the comments as we had received into different sections and looked at them and analyzed them and really came up with this graphic that summarizes where we are in terms of engagement and where people what ideas they brought us when we said, what do you want to see in Silver Spring in the future? And this is what we got. And I really think the plan has tried hard to address many of these ideas in different ways. So to talk briefly about the plan goals and vision, and I think, every recommendation that we talk about tonight or any of the questions we answer, we've really tried to connect all of these back to the plan themes and the goals that come under those themes. So as a result of the visioning that we did, and of course, in addition to the team visioning, we did the external visioning and sort of internal visioning, tried to bring it all together, and we landed on 4 sort of themes for the goals of the plan: diversity, connectivity, resiliency, and community health. Equity is actually an underlying ribbon or connective tissue that connects all of those themes. This is the first sector plan to be moving forward since the council passed the 2019 racial equity bill. The planning department is actually charged in the bill to consider racial equity and social justice when writing a sector plan or a master plan. We have really taken that to heart. We developed a lot of tools for that. We've worked on it throughout, and we think that both the goals and the recommendations in this plan reflect that focus on equity, and it's really throughout. It's not in one section, and I think anybody who's actually read the plan can see that. And so we've tried to sort of figure out what is equity in planning through this plan as our first attempt, and we're sure that the plans that come after us are going to do it even better. But we were really excited to be the first plan to try and sort of tackle this. Diversity is about strengthening and building upon the unique retail market in Silver Spring with its diverse mix of retail and arts experiences. It's also about providing diverse, affordable housing types to individuals and families of all ages, regardless of income and background, and about celebrating the diverse cultures that are part of the Silver Spring community today. Connectivity speaks to creating a green network of streets and open spaces that connect the distinct neighborhoods of Silver Spring and meet the needs of both people and the environment. It's also about reinforcing the existing bike and pedestrian network and growing it, making it even stronger to reduce cars in the downtown. And the plan focuses specifically on improving connectivity across the Metro Rail CSX tracks, which are often, felt to be kind of a dividing feature of Silver Spring, and we really try and focus on how to mitigate that. Resiliency is both economic growth and resiliency with regard to environmental resiliency. It's the ability to adapt and thrive in the face of change, and obviously the recent events of the last year and a half as we've been going through COVID have really demonstrated how important resiliency is to a growing urban area. The goals here are to support sustainable economic growth and development through recommending flexible zoning, development incentives, public realm, and infrastructure improvements. It also is to reduce the impacts of climate change through sustainable strategies for buildings and streetscapes to try and mitigate some of the challenges that we know are already here and will only get more challenging in the future. Community health is about focusing on creating more opportunities to pursue activities to improve our physical and mental health, including active parks and cooler, more comfortable streets and sidewalks. And so when we bring this all together, the plan really imagines a Silver Spring of the future that is diverse, distinctive, and thriving, a downtown that will continue to be a great place to work, to do business, and enjoy the arts, a downtown that is home to small, independent businesses, cutting-edge tech companies, hubs for science and research, educational institutions, and arts organizations that draw patrons from around the region. Downtown Silver Spring, on this vision, will maintain its uniqueness while remaining an affordable and attractive place to live for people of all ages and backgrounds. New open spaces will support a healthier community for all who spend time in the downtown. The plan envisions an urban area characterized by green, climate-resilient, walkable streets that are safe and comfortable for everyone who travels them, pedestrians, bikes, transit riders, and drivers. Excuse me. So to talk a little bit how we structure the plan recommendations without actually going through all of them, which would take the entirety of this meeting. On the plan area, and we often do this is a common approach for sort of large plan areas, is to look at it and understand it as a series of smaller neighborhoods. And Silver Spring already has that structure built in, and there are already sort of recognizable neighborhoods here. And so we've structured the plan so that there are visions and also excuse me, it's the season. We have specific recommendations that are for each district, as well as plan-wide policy recommendations that are for the whole plan area. In each district, we also identify key opportunity sites and open spaces that we're recommending for that particular district, and you can see all of that as you go through the district section. Plan-wide recommendations cover all of these topics that are here. There's all of these, and obviously in the districts, it's more focused on sort of urban design and parks and public space recommendations. And some of those are sort of repeated and reiterated in these sections. But here we have, an array of recommendations that address all the topics here and often recommend sort of policy change or even a zoning change to address these. Excuse me. Here are some of the key ones, just to highlight a list of highlights, obviously. From a zoning perspective, we're recommending a building height incentive zone pretty much in the center core area of the downtown, along with a connectivity and infrastructure fund. And together, those two are going to help fund some key infrastructure and connectivity projects in the plan while allowing properties in that zone to achieve more height and density than they are given today. As I've said before, we have a vision and recommendations for each district to redevelop key sites and build on the district's unique character and assets. A green loop is a big concept in this plan. It's really a complete street network that focuses on sustainability and looks to expand and unify access for all residents to green, safe, and inviting sidewalks, bikeways, parks, and open spaces. We have recommendations that look to create new parks and also enhance the existing parks, including a major renovation of Jessup Blair Park. This plan supports the expansion of bioscience, tech, and education uses to increase employment opportunities in the plan area. And we are recommending various zoning updates that hopefully will encourage greater flexibility of development, increase affordable housing, and support small business growth and realize some of the other sector plan goals. So after today, the next things that are coming up. So there's a public hearing on December 2nd. It's at 6:30 p.m. At the moment, the way the public hearing will work is it'll be in person, but you can also participate virtually. I guess that's always subject to change based on how things go, but that's the current plan. There is, we've sent out before, and we can send out again at the end of this meeting, the link where you have information about signing up to testify, which means either actually testifying in person or virtually live, or you can always submit written testimony ahead of time. I believe the deadline is December 1st at noon, and that's available for the public certainly. Then we move right into what's called work sessions with the planning board, which is essentially where we present. We presented the plan to the board, but we didn't really, it was so they could say, let's set the public hearing for this plan. Now we'll have a series of work sessions. It's going to be over, from December 9th to January 6th, where we come to the board and go through the recommendations step by step. And that's their opportunity to give comments and provide their input and sort of shape the plan, a little bit in the direction that they want if there are things that we haven't addressed. And that is something that we do slowly over the course of those weeks and sort of update the plan as we go. So by the January 11th, we will have a revised plan, and at that point it's the planning board draft that gets transmitted to the county council, and then the process sort of repeats itself at the county council level. The county council is trying to, we're on a bit of a rushed schedule for this plan. That's a little bit tighter than usual, but they will then set a public hearing with the required notice and go through their own process of work sessions with the staff and a council review before we have a final version of the plan. So that is what is coming next. And that's it for this part of the presentation. And now we're going to move into question and answer. And I'm going to change my screen so I can see everybody.
Excellent.
And if we need to, we do have some exhibits we can pull up to help answer things, but I'm going to stop sharing for now so I can sort of see everybody while we go through question and answer. And as I said, we had questions. If you registered with the form, there was a chance to submit in advance. So we're going to answer those first because people did submit in advance, and then we'll move into, questions that other people have that are here today.
Okay, great. So I think we'll just go ahead and dive right in. The first question is about the green loop. Per section 5.1.10, the green loop will be primarily implemented through frontage improvements required for each development. The streetscape improvement public benefit or CIP improvements. What is the streetscape improvement public benefit? And if we rely on frontage improvements, will that create gaps in the loop? For example, if a developer creates, the green loop stretch in front of their building, but it's not, it doesn't happen in the neighboring building. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, and that's exactly that's a great question, and I would love the opportunity to explain that. So, there's two methods that you can develop a project, essentially two options for the way projects are developed. One is called standard method, where you don't actually have to, you're not capturing sort of the full, it's an easier process and you don't have to go through the planning review. So I don't want to talk about that too much, but many projects that are trying to capture their full density and height and sort of the full value of what's available, they go through something called optional method, which means that you are going through a process of plan review with the planning board before you go and apply for your construction permits. There are many things that come along with that process, but one of the things that comes along with it is you need to provide some public benefit, and there's a whole list and a process of what those optional method public benefits are. And there's a long list, and they have different point values, and you have to accumulate a certain number of points if you're the applicant coming forward with a project. One of those benefits is a streetscape improvement benefit, and it has to go, if you're going to try and capture that benefit, you have to be providing streetscape improvements that go beyond, your frontage improvements that you'd be required to. And so that's one way, exactly as the person who asked the question is correct. If we were just relying on frontage, then we wouldn't have an ability to fill in the gaps. But here we have sort of two options for how to fill in the gaps. One is that, an applicant might say, oh, I see somebody else on the block has done, their frontage improvements and it complies with, and it's, it's a green loop direction. I want to do that here, and I'm going to improve the gap, and that's going to be our public benefit, and we'll get the maximum number of points for that. So that is that's sort of the thinking behind identifying that as a strategy to have pieces of the green loop implemented, even if it's not along the frontage of a new development site. Next question.
Great, thank you. So a related question, how will the funding from the Connectivity and Infrastructure Fund be prioritized among the projects?
That's an excellent question, and the answer to that is simply that we are still figuring that out. It's not uncommon for us to propose sort of an overall strategy, and then when we get to the planning board, work it out to one degree, and then when we get to the council, continue to work it out. And this is one of those things where we need more, more input to get all the details worked out. And so we had the general idea, and follow along with the plan and the revisions that are made, and we'll have that figured out over the course of the next month or two.
Great. So our next question is about affordable housing. Could you talk a little bit about what affordable housing is available now in the plan area and what is planned?
So for this question, I am going to toss the ball to our housing planner, Lisa Gavoni.
Thanks, Atara. That's a great question. So Silver Spring is currently very well served by affordable housing. It has probably the most affordable housing of any master plan area in the county, with almost 2,000 income restricted units in the plan area. The public hearing draft recommends building upon this strong foundation of affordable housing in Silver Spring, and recommends all optional method of development projects, which Atara just talked about what those are, to provide a minimum of 15% moderately priced dwelling units, or MPDUs, or other DHCA equivalent affordable housing. For those of you that don't know, the MPD program is a mandatory set aside for affordable housing in Montgomery County, and the current requirement is 12.5%. So we're recommending that set aside be increased to 15. We also talk about preserving existing market rate affordable housing in the plan, striving for no net loss of affordable housing. And then also we have a recommendation for publicly owned properties to be encouraged to provide up to 30% MPDUs with 15% affordable to households earning the standard MPDU level, and then 15% affordable for earning less than 50% AMI, so meaning the lower income households. And that's for publicly owned properties. And I think that covers it.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, our next question. Can you explain the attainable housing strategies recommendations that are referenced in the plan and what the recommendations are for the adjacent communities R60 lots that are located in the plan boundary?
Sure. So I'm going to start off answering the question, and then I'm going to let Lisa talk a little bit about attainable housing. I think this is probably a question that many people have, and we've gotten this question a lot. So I'll start off by saying that we fully acknowledge that it's confusing to have multiple plan efforts going on at the same time that seem to be addressing similar issues. That being said, to back up a bit for people who are not familiar, we did start off this plan looking at attainable housing or missing middle housing at the direction of the planning board, and over the course of the time that we're doing this plan, the council decided that they wanted to talk about that, and in concert with the planning board, ultimately determined to let the planning department do a countywide study, which is called Attainable Housing Strategies, and therefore, which we are all, the staff and the planning board are in agreement that the way to really study this at this point is really countywide would be the most appropriate, and that they've been really working hard on that for months. The original schedule had attainable housing finishing before the Silver Spring plan. So our plan all along, once that got going and we sort of turned over the research we did to that team and let them take it countywide, was to say that actually, that is going to come first. They're going to make recommendations about R60 and R90, and then we're going to come after, and we're not going to do anything to the parcels that are, we're not going to make anything different about the R60 parcels that are in our plan area, because they're going to rely on the recommendations that were already set forth. Even though the schedules are not aligning anymore, that is still our plan. That is to say that attainable housing strategies is probably not wrapping up for another month, but we believe that the countywide approach is the appropriate approach now that we've done this kind of work on this for the past year, and we've really all learned together with the attainable housing team about the right approach towards how to look at what housing options are appropriate in R60 and R90, and therefore within the Silver Spring plan we will not be making any Silver Spring specific recommendations about what happens in the R60 parcels, and that is, I know, can be confusing because that's not what we said in the beginning of the plan, but that is how it has evolved, and that's where we are now. Attainable housing is going to continue on its schedule, and one day eventually, if the council decides to pick it up and make a countywide change, that change would obviously apply to everything within the Silver Spring boundary, but it's not like we're going to do something special here and then it will be in conflict. With that, Lisa, if you have anything to add about attainable housing and where attainable housing is sort of leaning right now in terms of R60 at like a high level, so people sort of have a sense of where that is.
Sure, thanks, Atara. So like Atara said, the recommendation is for strategic alignment between the recommendations and attainable housing strategies in the Silver Spring Downtown Plan. We are obviously looking at R60 countywide, not just Silver Spring, but for Silver Spring, what that means is for attainable housing, we are recommending an R60 near transit, which is where all the adjacent communities would fall in, allowing up to quadplexes by right with conformance with the pattern book. And if you want to know what a pattern book is, I can certainly talk about that. You can reach out to me. Also, I can put my email in the chat, but I don't want to take up too much time explaining that. But that's where we're leaning. So again, the recommendation is up to quadplexes by right with conformance with the pattern book for the adjacent communities in attainable housing strategies.
And just, to be clear, that's not a recommendation in this plan. This plan is going to go forward. That's not included in this plan. But if attainable housing, and we can put the link to that website, and that the schedule and their resources are all on their website, and that right now they're planning to try and wrap that up by the end of the year or the beginning of the new year, and then they'll have a final report on the website. But that is still, again, that plan does not change the zoning by itself. It has to go to county council, and county council ultimately is the body that changes the zoning. It's just a set of recommendations addressing R60 and R90. So we can get back after we get through the pre-submitted questions, and we're happy to go back to that if people need, further clarification.
Great. We have another question related to the adjacent communities. Why were the adjacent communities excluded from the rezoning as part of this plan? Why should the areas where there are majority homeowners be allowed to remain single-family detached housing while the areas with majority rental units are rezoned?
So this obviously connects, I think, to the question we just discussed, is that while we started to explore how to approach more housing types in R60, actually, I think what we think is sort of a preferable approach is that because the issue is a big issue right now and it sort of merits being discussed at a countywide, that it now is being discussed at that countywide, and we expect that, one day that will be addressed in that manner, and it will be a wholesale change to R60 and R90 and not focusing on specific blocks in Silver Spring. That being said, we actually did change the zoning on a handful of R60 blocks, and I can pull up the zoning map maybe I'll do that. One second, because I do have it on a slide here. There are a series of blocks that are in Fenton Village, and let me see if I can pull this up so everybody can see it. All right, here we go. Let's see if I can do this quickly. A series of blocks in Fenton Village that are in between Fenton and Grove, and those blocks are sort of unusual because, let's see if I can get to the slide. There we go. It's sort of over here. This was looking at something different, but oh, actually, this drawing is outdated. So you know what? We're not even going to look at that one. I'm not sure why that one is there, but in any event, there are blocks that are in between Fenton and Grove, and folks who are familiar with East Silver Spring will be familiar with those blocks. And there's like CR parcels that are on Fenton in the first parcel or two, the commercial residential, and then it switches abruptly to R60 all the way to Grove. And that it's about 4 blocks. And, looking at that, we made the decision to actually rezone those blocks and the block on Bonifant, between Bonifant and Wayne, sort of any block that included CR parcels already that was on sort of that border. We decided that, that's an opportunity for transitional scale housing between the CR commercial residential scale and the residential neighborhood. And that's a place where we felt that it wasn't just a matter of redefining R60, which we weren't going to do in this plan, but we actually said, no, these blocks could be a great place for sort of a transitional scale. And so we rezoned them a zone called CRN, which is technically a commercial residential zone, and it's commercial residential neighborhood zone. And we've actually set the C to 0, and this is really getting into the weeds of that approach. But and here I now have something on my screen I can share with you. That allows us to say, let's get some, let's permit some denser residential zoning here, and this is looking at the actual plan. And so here are the adjacent community blocks. All of these purple blocks were R60, and now we're recommending them to be CRN 0.75 with a C set to 0. So it's not going to permit commercial development. It's still going to be only residential. But when we're looking at something called 0.75 FAR, most of these parcels are between 8,000 and 10,000 square feet with some exceptions, and that would allow sort of a small multifamily unit building. And here we're not talking about necessarily the missing middle scale of the house scale that we were just talking about. This is talking about really like small apartment buildings, small multifamily buildings. They could be as small as a quadplex, but probably could go up to about 8 or 9 units depending on the parcel. It's based on FAR, so it's not based on units, and that gives you more flexibility in terms of how that could happen in the future. Of course, when you do this, it doesn't mean that anything is going to change in the near term. It just gives the opportunity for that, and it really would provide a better transition from sort of the really downtown feeling of this side of Fenton Village and the very residential single family home feeling and character of East Silver Spring. And that is one change that we have made. So I wouldn't say that we've sort of not addressed any R60. We've addressed it in this way because this would not be covered in the attainable housing plan. It would not address that scale in this location. And so that's a move that we've made within the recommendations for this plan.
Great. Okay, one more question related to the adjacent communities. Is there any provision in the plan to allow the lower density property owners, such as single family detached house, duplex, et cetera, to use a limited amount of space on the first floor of their building to open a small low impact business such as the neighborhood cafe or small electronics repair shop?
Sorry, I'm gonna read the question again. And so so not within this plan, no, I would say, and I think that's something that maybe you know I don't know, at least would have to comment if they're sort of exploring that sort of thing within attainable housing. But right now, the way the zoning is recommended in this plan, we're not. I said we're not really changing the zoning on the R60 parcels that are R60 that are remaining R60. And right now, those CRN parcels I just talked about, at the moment we've set the C to 0, which largely would not allow that. Although there may be able to be some sort of case by case exceptions. It would depend how how somebody came forward with a development application for that, but it wouldn't be sort of as of right.
Okay, great. So now we have some questions related to the environment. Can you explain how Silver Spring's existing mature trees and tree canopy will be securely preserved as part of the green loop that connects Silver Spring's unique neighborhoods?
So I'm going to let Tina talk about tree canopy.
Hi, thanks, Atara. Yeah, so the trees are protected, the canopy is protected in a couple of ways. So there's private property and there's also the right of way. And in the right of way, there's a regulation called the Montgomery County Roadside Tree Protection Law. There's also a Maryland Roadside Tree Protection Law where Department of Transportation and State Highway have to protect the trees that they can. And then there's also on private property, we have the Forest Conservation Law and we have the Tree Preservation Protection Law. And so the ideas for these laws are to protect as many trees as possible. So there's going to be a significant effort on the law side, but also on the planning side. So part of the goal is to cool Silver Spring. We, as part of the plan itself, and trees are a big part of that. And we are hiring consultants to help us to cool the community. And trees will be looked at differently on this plan. And what we want to do is make sure that trees are protected to the maximum extent possible. So that's our goals.
Thank you, Tina. So this question is related. How will the county monitor the status of tree canopy value to Silver Spring and improve the heat island index of Silver Spring, which is one of the worst in the county, improve water quality and the biodiversity of Sligo Creek as an essential geographic ecosystem buffer? Sorry, that was a lot in one sentence. I hope you got all that.
Yeah, well, if I didn't, make sure that I come circle around, check me on it. So it's really a two-part question. So at least I think it's two parts. And one of them is trees and how are we going to come back and monitor those trees? And unfortunately, the sector plans are like a window of time and they cover 30 years and we don't come back and won't be looking intently in the way we did the environmental analysis. However, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, we think they're going to be doing continuous heat island analysis, perhaps every 5 years, maybe every 7 years. And so we'll be able to see what the temperatures are and whether they're cooling, they're reducing the temperatures of the surface and heat island effect. And so we hope that that's going to happen ongoing. And then also for the second part of the question was water quality. So the Department of Environmental Protection and also Park and Planning Commission, the Parks Department, they do aquatic monitoring. And what they do is they monitor the benthic aquatic, which are the insects that are at the bottom of the water. And then they measure the fish. And then they also measure the amphibians. And so when I mean measure, they're doing an analysis to find what species are there and what are their numbers. And that indicates like water quality. But it is monitored at a different location. It's monitored south of Carroll Avenue. So that's a larger watershed. And it doesn't necessarily indicate whether or not Sligo Creek is improving because of stormwater management protections that were being implemented in Silver Spring. We hope we'll see some changes. That's another thing. Stormwater management is a key part of this plan. So every new development and road projects are going to include stormwater management. So no matter what, we know that quality will be improved because it doesn't have a lot of treatment right now. Like it's mostly impervious without treatment. So every new development will improve water quality. I hope that answers the questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Tina. So we have another question. Right now, Seven Oaks Evanswood is characterized by abundant mature trees with huge canopies. The plan discusses replacing street trees that are lost to development, but what if trees that are in backyards and side yards, as well as mature trees in front yards that are decades old? If the county allows much denser buildings to replace detached single-family homes, this will lead to the destruction of existing mature trees and crucial environmental and social benefits they bring. How will the county prevent this from happening?
Yeah, it ties back into that first question that I answered, and it's about the existing laws that are already in place, which I had mentioned, and the goal of the site plan reviewer and our staff to try to maximize when tree protection when a development comes in. And we really hope that these trees are protected because we also know that they serve a purpose. They serve a cooling purpose. They serve a biological purpose, air quality, health. I mean, these are really important. And we know that these large trees are key to sequestering carbon and storing carbon. And it's the larger trees that do the most work. Younger trees don't act the same way as larger ones for decades. So we're going to try really hard to protect these trees.
Lauren, you're muted.
Yeah, Lauren, you're muted. Sorry.
I'm so sorry. Sorry about that.
I will say before I'm not, I mean, I've been looking at the chat and typically we've been trying to answer questions as we go. I will say someone just asked a question that's kind of a follow-up to Tina's question, and I want to just respond to that. That if denser development is allowed by right, how can the county prevent it and the tree loss that will result from it? So I think if we're talking about in the adjacent communities and we're talking about the way AHS is approaching it right now, that if you're talking about, and I'm not on the AHS team and Lisa could respond better, but if the idea is house scale, then you're essentially saying we don't want anything that takes up any more space on the lot than a single family house takes up. It's just that we're taking that house and dividing it into smaller units inside, which therefore would conceptually, not, we're not permitting apartment buildings that will take over. We're not permitting larger things that will really take up a much greater percentage of the lot area. The idea with the AHS, again, those recommendations are not in this plan, is in R60 and R90 to look at things that are, in R60 in particular, to look at things that are house scale, right? And that's what we're talking about here. And that is, if those become allowed by right, there are controls that would be set in place to maintain that house scale piece. And so that would basically be the control that allowed the whole lot not to be taken over. That's still not how R60 would function. Is that a fair answer, Lisa?
Yes, that's a fair answer. We're not looking to change any of the setbacks or the height. We're looking to keep things house scale. And that's really where that pattern book is going to come into play, where we want to also use that as a tool to preserve a lot of this tree canopy that Tina explained why it's really important to keep.
Excellent. Thank you for that clarification. I just want to clarify. So we are first going through all the questions that we have submitted because I see a few hands up. And then after we get through the rest of those questions, I think we have 5 or so more. We'll try to address as many questions in the chat or that people have with their hands raised before we conclude the meeting.
Yeah, we'll try and get through these in the next few minutes so we can give
yes.
15, 20 minutes for additional questions.
So the next one is we had a few questions about pedestrian safety. The first one's general. How does this plan address pedestrian safety throughout? And then more specifically, what are the plans for pedestrian safety at the corner of Wayne Avenue and Dale Drive?
So Iftin, if you want to take pedestrian safety questions.
Yeah, so as far as the plan for pedestrian safety, so in our recommendations, we actually put tables as well as a map that kind of shows where we're recommending protected crossings all over in the plan area. We also share information as to like where we feel sidewalks should be placed. It is ultimately up to MCDOT to determine, operationally how these things would happen. So we would just be in continuance, coordination with MCDOT, and when it comes to specific intersections, especially like Wayne Avenue and Dale Drive.
Great, thank you. So now we have some questions related to Fenton Village. The first one is, why are you removing Wayne Avenue properties from the Fenton Village overlay zone? This will leave small restaurants vulnerable, especially Gari Kebab, which is very good, which may qualify as a legacy business.
So actually, we're not actually removing any properties from the Fenton Village overlay zone. I'm going to share my screen. I think people actually don't always realize that not all of what we would consider Fenton Village colloquially is actually in the zone. This is the existing Fenton Village overlay zone, and it actually goes like this. And I believe that restaurant is in this group of low things. And so actually, these parcels over here that sort of respond to Wayne and Georgia are actually not in the Fenton Village overlay zone, which is this zone here. This one is South Silver Spring Ripley. One of the things that we are doing is we're actually taking this edge and extending the zone so it captures all of the CR parcels that are there and does not have this gap next to, going into the transition to the neighborhood that are out of the zone that, sort of cleaning up the edge, but we actually aren't changing the edge here. And, there are specific sort of reasons that you want kind of the massing of those parcels to sort of respond to what's going on across the street. But the overall intent of the Fenton Village zone is relatively preserved in this plan.
Great. And can you clarify the 300 feet height for affordable housing that applies to Fenton Village? What are the conditions for 300 feet?
So actually, I'll back up a little bit. In overall, anywhere either in the CR zone, no matter what your actual height is, this is an oversimplification, but there is a rule. Again, going back to that optional method development concept we talked about before, one of the things you can do is provide a lot of affordable housing and moderately priced dwelling units called MPDUs, and you can actually get a height bonus for that. So that actually is something that's already in the zoning code. It's not part of this plan. That's part of the zoning code. There are many projects that have taken advantage of that, and there's more details associated with it. But that is one way that there are height bonuses given to projects for exceeding a certain threshold of affordable housing. That's true in Silver Spring, and it's true everywhere else. We have in this plan something called the Building Height Incentive Zone, which does not include Fenton Village. It's only capturing properties that are in sort of the Metro Center and Ellsworth and a little bit of downtown North zone. It definitely doesn't touch anything that's in the Fenton Village overlay zone and that is in that area. In that built-in incentive zone, their properties will be allowed if they make a contribution to the Connectivity and Infrastructure Fund, and if they go through a design review process, they will be allowed to obtain additional height and density, potentially up to a height cap on most parcels of 300 feet. 300 feet is because that is actually, according to the zoning code, kind of the highest mapped height you could give in Montgomery County right now. And so we set that as our cap because it is, theoretically you could have a property that's mapped to 300, and there are a few in the county. And so that's what we've set up for that zone. That's an area of the plan that we feel can handle more height, actually an area that many property owners have asked for more height to be able to realize the density on their property with an appropriately designed building. It gives them more flexibility, and so we're trying to provide an opportunity for that and also capture some public benefit through the Connectivity and Infrastructure Fund with that mechanism. Fenton Village, there's definitely, there will not be any buildings of 300 feet in Fenton Village if the zoning is the way it is proposed in this plan.
Great.
Although I guess I will add that you could, in Fenton Village, you certainly could get additional height of what's mapped with the affordable housing bonus, and projects have done that, but based on where the height is now, it would not get anywhere near 300 feet.
So our next question is about Bonifant Street. How do you envision street cafes and trees when the purple line is taking all the available public space?
So Bonifant right now, and I think we said sidewalk cafes, I'm pretty sure, in the text of the plan, and not street cafes. There is, obviously, the purple line, as everyone knows, is going to run along Bonifant Street. The way the current plan are, and I will say we had regular meetings and continue to have with MCDOT folks that coordinate with the purple line team, and so we get our information that way. There's two tracks for the purple line, one going one direction and one going the other direction. And there was still a debate, I believe, last time that Ifton and I talked to them, that whether or not the cars would actually be sharing that lane or they have a separate drive lane. But either way, the right of way was actually, that the road bed was actually not changing. And so there is room, as there is on most blocks, for better streetscape, better trees, opportunities for, Bonifant to, it's a block with numerous potential redevelopment sites, including some surface parking lots that are sort of obvious redevelopment sites. And we really think that this plan is really envisioning and really hope that with the purple line running on the street, that brings a certain level of activity and access to that street that maybe there wasn't quite before. And though many of those opportunity sites along that street would have the opportunity to include more sidewalk activity than there is currently right now. But actually, the purple line isn't changing the road bed, and we aren't proposing to change that either.
Okay, the next question is a specific one about the east-west, north-south connection envisioned for the garage 4 area, and it's just a question to clarify that a little bit.
Sure, I'm going to let John Marcolene take that question, and I actually have a slide to go with that one. So I'll get the slide up, and John, you can take the question.
Thanks, Tara. As soon as the slide comes up, I'll explain it to you. So there are three or four reasons why we propose these connections. First of all, it creates more pedestrian connections north and south and east and west, as you can see there. And it provides better access to the interior of the block and serves potential new buildings and open spaces when they happen. Today, it's a block that's basically dominated by a large parking garage. And then third, it would provide streets, paths, connections that are green, tree shaded, and away from heavier automobile traffic on Fenton Street and Silver Spring Avenue. So it provides a more pleasant pedestrian experience.
Great. And so one last question we have is in South Silver Spring. And we received actually a few questions that were a little similar, so I grouped them. There's been some concern about the impact of proposed development at this existing storage unit site, which I think is 8001 Newell Street. And in particular, concerns about obstructed views and noise pollution from the surrounding residents. What is currently allowable on the site versus what is being proposed in the plan? And what does the county plan to do to mitigate these issues for the homeowners and residents there?
So right now, that property is within the Ripley South Silver Spring overlay zone. The plan is proposing right now, the modification that we proposed so far to that zone is really not actually about what's in the details at this point. It's just about saying, well, we don't need that in the Ripley district anymore. There's been a ton of development there. It's been incentivized sufficiently, and there'll probably be more development there. And so we're just going to focus on South Silver Spring. At this point, those controls have not been modified in this plan. There's no language modifying the controls that are there now. And this is something though, when we go to the planning board and we're going to talk about everything we're doing with regard to overlay zones, that conversation will undoubtedly come up. But at this, I think at this moment, there is nothing in the plan that is really different materially than what is on the books now. In that overlay zone, it does restrict building heights along Newell and Eastern, and that text isn't proposed at the moment to be changed, with the draft of the plan that the staff has written to this point.
Great, and that was actually our last question that was pre-submitted. So now we'll go ahead and call on someone who has been raising their hand for a very long time and been very patient. Karen, do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question?
Are you talking to Karen Roper? Because I haven't been waiting hardly at all.
I think I see your hand up, so go ahead.
Okay, my hand's up, but I didn't wait very long. Okay, I'm sorry to do this to you, Tara, but when you explained in the plan, it says you're adding and subtracting some properties from the Fenton Village overlay zone. I couldn't see you pointing to this property or that. I don't know what properties they are, and I can't tell from the plan.
So we're actually just adding, we're not subtracting.
Okay, so you're just extending it.
We are, so along
So you're
the
going to
eastern,
include most of Wayne and the library.
no, so those parcels are not included now.
Right.
And we're leaving those parcels as not included. That's what we proposed so far. Where we've proposed to add parcels is to the east of Fenton Street. So as you are maybe familiar with, to the east of Fenton Street right now, the overlay zone goes like one parcel, and then there's like one or two more parcels of CR before it transitions to East Silver Spring Residential.
Okay.
And we are going to say that the overlay zone should capture all of those CR parcels, and we shouldn't have some on the border between, part of the language in the zone, in that overlay zone, looks to control the height and density of the buildings that border East Silver Spring, but there are actually CR parcels that are outside of the zone.
I get it.
We look to pull those in to kind of keep it a consistent approach towards those parcels on that end.
Okay, was there any in the southern end?
It's really just extending that eastern boundary over. Okay. I can tell you which page, I can send you.
No, that's fine. I get it. I get it now. Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Karen. So our next person that has their hand raised is Deborah. Do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, Deborah?
Yeah, hi. So I was probably one of the people who had submitted a question about Newell Street, but I also submitted another question. And I'm wondering how your plans will or won't be coordinated with a private proposal to develop the area between 13th Street, Eastern, Kennett, and the county parking lot, which apparently is also going to be submitted. And you're basically surrounded by many streets that are only 2 lanes, and there's going to be a huge amount more traffic and congestion. And I'm wondering why, with all the rental buildings that have already been put up and all the empty retail space, why this is all being done now, and if it's being coordinated at all.
So we are familiar, obviously that project has to come through the planning department, and they have started that process. The way it works though is that, right now this plan isn't adopted, and it won't be for, a little while until next year. And so anybody is able to come in, under the existing plan that's there now, and get a development approved, that we don't pause all of that while we're writing the plan. That being said, I will say that applicant came forward and wanted to talk to the team early on to understand what we were proposing in South Silver Spring, so they could have a sense of whether they were, aligning or not. So I will say there has been probably a little bit of coordination. They were interested in coordinating. They knew we were doing this, and we did talk to them about, and people may be aware of this, there is the Parks Department is nearly done acquiring a parcel on Kennett Street that will become a new park in South Silver Spring, a Parks Department owned park, an MNC PPC park. And at that time, we did sort of make sure that when that was sort of solidified, we made sure that the applicant was aware of that, for example, because they're right adjacent to that. We wanted to make sure they were aware. So we did have some preliminary discussions with them, but they are allowed to come in with a project under the current plan, because this plan is not yet approved.
Right, I understand that, but I guess my question is really, what, if anything, is going to be done about the incredible congestion that will result if all these things, if the storage unit has a 10-story building on it, and then there's all this retail space behind the building that's currently on Newell. I mean, it's really not going to be very pleasant for the people who already live there.
Well, so as we just discussed, that actually the storage building isn't right now permitted to do anything different than it is today. That isn't being, that hasn't yet been changed as part of this plan. And in terms of the development application that's coming in for the 13th Street, they're actually, they didn't want any additional height or zone. They're coming in with what's mapped there today, which is already deemed to be sort of like what the site, the site can handle it. But to your point, we actually do a transportation analysis that looks at everything that's proposed in the plan and measures it against sort of the adequacy of the network. And and we sort of confirm that the network is going to be adequate, or we make recommendations to improve the adequacy of the network, and all of that has been done and shown that with the existing zoning on that 13th Street site, which we're actually not really changing much of in this plan, that it would remain adequate. And so that site was underutilized for a long time, and the application, at least as far as I understand it, that's come forward is just seeking to utilize the FAR that's been sitting on that site since the last plan was written, the last 20 years.
Okay, great. Thank you, Atara. So I realize that we're at time, but I do want to respond to the last person who has their hand raised.
Yeah,
Wendy,
sure.
do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for doing this meeting. It's really helpful. It's nice that you guys are spending your evenings doing this. It's a lot of time. The first question that you handled, Atara, was actually my question. It was about the green loop, a concept about which I'm really pumped. I hope this comes to fruition. It sounds amazing. I live just outside of the area under that's being developed or as part of this plan. And so I'm really going to use that loop, I think. So you explained that through, I think it was a capital improvement plan or the point system, and I might be using the vocabulary correctly, but if one property wants to get points, they can not only develop their frontage, but an adjacent frontage, so they can get extra points or whatever, something like that, by developing more frontage than just what's in front of them. And so I'm still a little bit lost as to, it still seems like there's going to be patchwork potentially. So I'm curious, again, is it just going to be relying on frontage development, or is there going to be some overarching connection or implementation?
It is,
Yeah.
it is the kind of thing that, in the actual implementation of something like this, it does start off being piecemeal, but the hope is that as pieces of it start, that provides the impetus for a project to come along and say, oh, we're going to do that too. And we're going to make that our benefit, that our public benefit that we provide. They have to provide something. So there's a list of options, but if there's already a continuum, it's really an incentive to say we're going to do it, because then it's much easier when you're the third person coming in to do that than when you're the first. That being said, there's always the opportunity, and I think Ifton talked about this with regard to some of the other things like pedestrian safety. MCDOT comes in and does streetscape improvements as part of their CIP projects, and that we work very closely with them often, and that is something that also is a possibility, that if there becomes if there is always a potential for a gap or a key portion to be completed as part of another project that's outside of sort of the development application process. But yes, I mean, that is how these things often come together. That's how the bike stuff is often implemented in piecemeal, and then eventually you get to that. And part of the goal, and it's a good analogy, I think, we have a bicycle master plan, and part of what that master plan does from 2018 is identifies priorities, right? Where should the bike lanes go when we have the opportunity to put in one? Where do they go? What are we trying to connect? What's the system that we're trying to get to, the full system that we're trying to get to in the end of the day? And that's what we're trying to do with the green loop. Complete streets are important. It would be great if every street is a complete street, but we are trying to prioritize and say, here is the central loop, that if we could get this to rise up to that level of a green street, we would get the most bang for our buck, frankly, out of that particular network. And then here are connectors that so we're trying to identify a prioritization in a way which hopefully helps the implementation in the future. Ultimately, the goal of the sector plan is to set up opportunities for implementation by, obviously not necessarily the planning department, because we're not really an implementation agency, but many of our partners, and of course anybody from the private development community who comes forward to develop in Silver Spring, and the people in the planning department who do the plan review of those applications use the sector plan as their guide for that, and that is really where the sort of the Green Loop implementation will come in.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Atara. We had 2 more hands go up, and I will defer to you, Atara. I know we're a little
I'll
bit
say
over
let's go to
already.
10 and see if we can get those other 2 questions in, and then I don't want to hold people past that.
Okay, great. So Brenda Freeman, do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm not quite sure how far this plan extends, but I did have a question about Dale Drive and Piney Branch.
So that's way outside the boundary. Actually.
That's outside the boundaries.
Yes.
Okay, because I'm concerned about safety there because of overgrown vegetation on a part of land that is owned by the county. I imagine it's them. And a turning and a right-hand turning, but I'll take it to someone else then. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda.
Thanks, Brenda. And the next person is Lauren.
Hi. I know you guys explained earlier that you're not changing any of the sort of specifics of the different zones. You're just changing what is zoned what. And so my question was about parking requirements, because I know for developments, that's often a really large source of cost, and then that gets carried on to the tenants of the building. So I was wondering if there's any portion of this plan that reduces parking requirements, and or if that has been discussed as part of this plan.
Sure. So in the, and I guess I don't have the map here, but most of downtown, well, everything that's in the sort of traditional downtown Silver Spring boundary, or most of those parcels actually, are within a parking lot district, which is sort of a mechanism set up by MCDOT. You find it in sort of the downtowns, where there are a lot of public garages that are supposed to provide adequate parking for people coming in, and that allows the development projects that come up in that plan to provide sort of less parking than they might be required to provide outside of that PLD if they were in a different part of the county, because you have some of the parking sort of automatically offset by the public parking provided. That's already the case, and this plan is sort of reinforcing that by saying we're in a downtown. We're supporting a very constrained parking policy. People come forward with developments, and we are sort of saying you can, provide as little parking as you can get away with to make your project work financially, and we'll probably be fine with that. And although it may be different a little bit on a case-by-case basis, depending on the use of the project and what have you, we're generally in favor of less parking and not more, and that'll be the way the projects will be reviewed that come in under this plan.
Okay, cool. That's good to know. I'm sure the parcels of land that the county is sitting on being used for parking are quite expensive, so I'm sure they would love to do something else with those if they could.
So actually, and that's actually I'll just mention it because it is a recommendation in the plan, and it is something that is a value, even from the parking lot district's perspective, MCDOT's perspective. You're right. They have numerous standalone garages that do not have any other use co-located with those garages, and those garages, for the most part, we have identified those as opportunity sites, which does not necessarily mean that the public parking would disappear. Typically in those situations, and there's at least one example of that already in the plan there in Spring Apartments, which used to be Public Garage 3, they actually, in a public-private partnership with MCDOT, developed a building, put the parking underneath. There is a subset of those spaces that is public parking, you access and pay for it exactly the ways you do for all the other garages. But of course, it is not so visible. It is wrapped, it's underground. It's part of a private development, and the parking is co-located. When the PLD does that with a developer, they work out how many spaces they need the developer to provide so that we don't lose the public parking, but that it is sort of not taking up by itself a whole very valuable piece of land in key places in the plan. And that's a recommendation that we have, and the PLD is fully in support of that. And there are several garages that they would love to see somebody come up and say, let's do this together on that spot. Okay. Lauren, is that it? Do we have,
I think that's it.
Put our email in. My email's on the website. Our emails are now in the chat. If anybody wants to follow up with anything, we're always happy to respond. Or you can call us on the phone, and we're here. The public hearing draft is on our website. As I'm sure most of you seem to be quite familiar, and I really am happy that everybody came. And sort of, we're always happy to clarify. We know this stuff is confusing, and there's a lot of detail involved, and it's hard to get it all from just, it's a 150-page document, so it's a lot to take it. If anyone has any more questions, we're always happy to elaborate, and we encourage anybody who has sort of opinions about what's in here to submit your testimony to the planning board, because that is the best way to get your voice heard at this point in the process. So with that, thank everybody and have a great evening. And
Thank you all. Have a good one.
Thank you.